Welcome to Tipping Point. I'm Lee Cummings. I'm guest hosting for Jimmy Evans today, and we have a very exciting show for you today. I'm going to be introducing you to a brand new friend. Maybe you've heard of him, but he's an incredible messianic believer. He's a musician, an author, a scholar who lives near Beersheba in Israel, has for the last 40 years with his wife Rachel. His name is Avner Boskey, and you're going to want to hear what he has to say today. We're going to be talking about his book that is just a phenomenal book called Jews, Arabs, and the Middle East, A Messianic Perspective. Avner, thank you so much for being with us today. Such an honor to have you.
Good to be with you. Good to be with you. God bless you.
For those who are our listeners who maybe are unfamiliar with who you are and what God's called you to do, would you just give everyone a brief introduction to yourself?
Sure. My name is Avner. Last name is Boskey. I was born in Montreal, Canada. I've been living in Israel for about 45 years. I was a searcher who had a Yiddish background, like Fiddler on the Roof. And I ended up coming to faith through meeting a believer from the Netherlands who told me about the Jewish Messiah. And I had never heard that he was Jewish. And so that was about, 45 years ago or something like that, maybe 50 years ago at this point. And been living in Israel, involved in pastoral ministry, outreach, writing, theological teaching, and worship, both here in Israel and around the world.
Fantastic. And you've lived in Israel for, is it 40 years now?
40 years. We also had a stint in St. Petersburg, Russia, where I was with a Messianic congregation, and I've been in the States a little bit as well.
Well, I think it's important that we ask this question today in light of everything that's been going on over the last several months and even the last several days. What is the tone, and how is the nation of Israel right now responding to the continued ongoing war, both in Gaza and now on the north with Hezbollah?
Somebody once said that even paranoid people can have real enemies. And that's kind of the situation in Israel. We've had real enemies, certainly over the past 100 years. But if you look in the Bible, it goes all the way back to Egypt and Haman and Persia. And part of it has to do with the calling of God on the Jewish people. Somebody doesn't like that. According to Revelation 12, the enemy doesn't like that. So here in Israel, we're not in post-traumatic stress syndrome. We're in traumatic stress syndrome. We're dealing with the shocks of people around us wanting to kill us. They base a lot of it on their religious perspective, on something called jihad, and the fact that they feel that they need to crush any spiritual authority or power in this land that does not submit, which is the word in Arabic, Islam, does not submit to the teachings of Muhammad.
Well, that's one of the things I wanted to have you on the program for and to talk to you about. You made mention of, quote, the peoples or the nations surrounding Israel that want to destroy them. I think that's one of the biggest questions that so many people have, and especially over the last 9 or 10 months as this war has broken out, is who are these people? And I think even for myself, prior to a good friend of mine giving me your book that I highlighted at the beginning, and I would encourage all of our viewers to go on Amazon or even your website and get this book, Jews, Arabs, and the Middle East. Prior to reading this book, my assumption was that both the Palestinian enemies, those who are part of Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, Hamas, other groups, that they were primarily descendants of Ishmael. And so there's a lot of talk about Ishmael and his descendants, that this is the problem. But when I began to read your book, it became clear that Ishmael's only part of the story. There are a lot of other people groups and a lot of other characters out of the Bible, both in history and in prophecy, that we're seeing unfold right now in the midst of this war. Can you talk a little bit about Ishmael and maybe some of the other Edom and some of those other groups? This will really help people.
Sure. I think many people have a romantic view of what's going on in the Middle East, kind of like, Family Feud. And they see this whole thing is basically because of Abraham, choosing Hagar. Uh, Ishmael specifically is not the focus in the last days scriptures. Edom is. You find just a little bit about Ishmael, like in Psalm 83, but mostly Edom. And so that's interesting because Edom are the people who came from Idumea, literally Edom on the right side of the Jordan River, and moved here around 601 BC, like the book of Obadiah talks about. So these descendants of Isaac, the brother of Jacob, those are the people who in the last days have a desire to destroy and murder the Jewish people. You can look at Ezekiel 25, Ezekiel 31 through 39. So what we have, we need to remember this, and it's something that people in the West find sometimes difficult. The Middle East never went through a Renaissance, never went through a Reformation. They, within the Arabic-speaking world, they tend to believe what it says in the Quran. And the Quran says that Jesus never died on the cross. He never was the Messiah as we know it. There is no atonement. There is no forgiveness of sin. That God hates the Jewish people, that the New Testament is not the Word of God, nor is the Torah. It's been distorted according to their view. And so from their perspective, there's a jihad or a holy war, which has to end in one of three ways: either submission and acceptance of the teachings of Muhammad, or bowing the knee and becoming second-class dhimmi citizens, or third, getting your head cut off. Those are the choices. And for people in the West, we don't understand how people can live that way, but that's the real world. Just as back in the 30s and 40s, communism was hard for many Americans to understand, a revolutionary desire to take over the world. So there are many people who say, certainly this can't be the way it is. This is the way it is. And these are the people who live around us. Now, when Muhammad came out of Saudi Arabia, using the modern term, and then his Jaish Muhammad, the army of Muhammad, went across North Africa and into Europe. They basically took everybody there, over 100 different ethnic groups. They forced them to speak Arabic. They told them, now you're descended from Ishmael, and now you're an Arab. But these people were not Arabs. They were not descended from Ishmael. They were not descended from Abraham. Very few of today's Muslims have any connection to Ishmael or Abraham. For instance, take Indonesia, the world's biggest Muslim country. No Semitic people there at all. So sometimes we do this whole thing about let's get Sarah and Hagar sitting at the table and everything's going to be peachy keen. When I read my Bible, that's not what I see about the end of days. I see a fight and a desire to destroy the Jewish people, very like what's going on in the news today.
So when we hear the news and even the geopolitical community talking about the, quote, Palestinian people, I think most people assume that the Palestinians, whether in Gaza or in the West Bank or some other, Judea and Samaria or any other area, that these are a distinct group of ethnic people. But that's really not true. They really weren't called Palestinian people, or that group was not identified as Palestinians until very recently. If that's not who they are, who are these people, like in Gaza and on the West Bank of the Jordan River?
You're asking a very long question. I had a teacher once in seminary, and he said to me, it's cutting the bologna so thin that there's only one side. So the term Palestinian is actually the Latin word for saying Philistine. And it goes back to 135 when Hadrian defeated the Bar Kokhba revolt here in Israel, and he said, I want to name this land after the enemies of the Jews. Who are they? They said, well, in the Bible, it's the Philistines. So that area was then called Palestine. So when you hear people talking about the Palestine of Jesus' day, word was not used.
Right.
When the British came in, they saw Palestine as a mandate. It wasn't a Turkish country either. The people who were here moved to here from either Jordan or from Syria or from Lebanon. But there were no indigenous people called Palestinians over the years. But what happened is Britain, based on reading its Bible, said, okay, that's the Palestine mandate. And so people began to call the area Palestine during that time. But they meant Jews as well as Arabs.
That's right.
So the Jerusalem Post was the Palestine Post then. The Anglo-Jewish Bank was called the Palestine Bank. And when you said a Palestinian, chances are you meant a Jew up to 1964.
Right.
That's when the PLO was set up in East Jerusalem. And they set it up basically to take over Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Beersheba. It wasn't the West Bank and Gaza. It was everything that should be no more Jews, no Jewish state. That was the whole idea. So the term Palestinian is actually kind of a red flag. It's a red herring. It's a coconut, the three coconuts games. And the Palestinians themselves here, some of them are from Edom, some of them are from Syria, some of them are from Egypt, some of them are from Sudan. But there is no Palestinian people per se. And again, what do I do? Read my book. You can get a hold of the book. It's not on Amazon, by the way. It's only on our website.
Okay, and we'll make sure that we put your website up so that our viewers and listeners can go there and get that. But I was thinking about the PLO and its leader, Yasser Arafat, who I think more than anybody kind of shaped and created out of nothing this identity, this ethnic identity. He was an Egyptian himself, wasn't he?
That's correct. He was also related to Hajj Amin al-Husseini by family, distant connection. But his goal, and he was seen by America, by the CIA, as really part of the terror network, including the Irish Republican Army, the IRA, the Red Brigades, the Baader Meinhof gang. However, unfortunately, the CIA also decided to train him through a man in Lebanon, a PLO man, and began to try to infiltrate the PLO to use it to further American interests in the Middle East, just like America is playing Iran and Saudi Arabia off each other in order to be the Machiavellian divide and conquer force of power within the Middle East.
Well, once again, I want to thank you for joining us here on Tipping Point. If you're not a subscriber, please go and subscribe, endtimes.com. There's lots of resources that are available on there that keep you up to date on all that's going on around the world. Great articles, great interviews, and you're not going to want to miss any of that. So please go and subscribe, and thank you so much for joining us on Tipping Point.